All right, today we're diving into a pitch from a company called GAIEC. That stands for Guy Enhanced Creative Productions, and they're making a pretty bold claim that they've cracked a totally new model for creating content. So let's break down their argument and see what it's all about. So they kick things off with a problem that I think we can all feel in our bones. Why is it that so much of the stuff we scroll through every single day just feels so empty and forgettable? Well, GAIC's diagnosis is that we're basically drowning in an attention crisis. Most content is just a quick, cheap thrill, a little dopamine hit designed to be forgotten in seconds, not to make any kind of real impact. This slide really gets to the heart of it. On the left, you've got what they call lazy marketing. Think about those pattern interrupts, a sudden loud noise, a jarring camera cut. It's a cheap trick, an external reflex just to get you to stop scrolling for a second. But on the right, that's their whole game, deep engagement. They don't want to startle you. They want to create unfinished loops. They want to plant a question in your mind, an idea that feels incomplete, so your subconscious just has to chew on it. It's the difference between a fleeting glance and something that genuinely sticks with you. Okay, so if that's the problem, what's their solution? Well, according to this pitch, it all starts with their fundamental philosophy, the why behind their whole operation. At the foundation of it all is this concept they call circular denken, which is just Dutch for circular thinking. The idea here is to get rid of the old way of doing things. Project has a start, a middle, an end, and then it's done. Instead, they design every piece of content so that the ending is actually the seed for the next piece. It creates this continuous, self-perpetuating loop that keeps an audience hooked and coming back for more. Now, you might think this circular approach just sounds like a recipe for chaos, but it's all governed by this principle they call sterkere rede, or stronger reason. It's basically about reasoned rule breaking. The idea is you have to know the rules of storytelling, of marketing, of design inside and out, so you know exactly when, and more importantly, why, to break them, to get a much, much bigger impact. And all of this leads to a pretty gutsy claim. They call themselves modern-day sophists. Now, what do they mean by that? Their point is that in today's world of loud, simplistic content slop, a deep, complex idea is actually the weaker argument because it just can't get any oxygen. So GAIC sees its mission as using a smarter strategy to make that profound, nuanced idea the one that actually cuts through the noise and wins. So that's the big idea, the why. But how do they actually pull it off? This next part of the pitch gets into the nuts and bolts, the how, laying out their secret sauce for creating this stuff. They call this the microfilm formula, and it's all built around a psychological principle called the Zeigarnik effect. The idea that our brains are wired to remember unfinished tasks way better than finished ones. So let's walk through it. First, the hook opens up a knowledge gap. Then, just as you're leaning in, boom, a mini cliffhanger leaves you hanging. It's only then, while your brain is screaming for an answer, that they deliver the core message. But they're not done. They hit you with a second cliffhanger to keep that tension high before finally giving you the revelation, that satisfying ending that finally closes the loop. But does any of this actually work? I mean, for any potential partner or investor, that's the real question, isn't it? Well, according to the data in their pitch, the answer is a big yes. They say that by applying this formula to educational content, they've seen 300% higher retention rates. That's not just getting someone's attention for a second, that's actually making information stick. And this quote really just sums it all up, doesn't it? A pattern interrupt, it grabs you for a moment and then it's gone. But an unfinished loop, that's designed to create an itch you have to scratch. It's an idea that follows you around long after you've scrolled away. Okay, so now we get to the what. What is the actual product here? How is it made? Well, they describe it as a symbiotic relationship, a true partnership between raw human creativity and the raw power of AI. The human side of this equation is described with this really unique term, #mydrag, which means my dragon. This is about taking raw, intense, even chaotic personal experiences, and they specifically mention the founder's own journey, and channeling that fire, that energy into the creative process. They're basically reframing what some might see as a liability and turning it into their core creative engine. It's a pretty powerful and unique selling proposition. And this philosophy seems to be right at the center of their brand identity. The whole narrative is about turning perceived weaknesses into foundational strengths. The message is clear. The only thing really holding anyone back is a fixed mindset. It's a powerful story of transformation, and it seems to fuel their entire approach. Now, here's where it gets really interesting from a business perspective, how they've actually systematized this. The human is the anchor. They're there at the very beginning to set the vision, and they're there at the very end to make the final creative call. The AI is the amplifier. It does all the heavy lifting in the middle, sifting through data, suggesting ideas at incredible speed. This creates a model that can scale up without turning the final creative product into just another commodity. And to make this work, they've developed their own proprietary system. They build what they call #context lakes. Think of them as these massive, deep databases of their own brainstorming sessions, their influences, their entire thought process. The goal isn't just to teach the AI facts, it's to teach it how they think, to replicate their specific style of reasoning. This creates a pretty defensible moat around their business that would be really hard for anyone else to copy. So, this all leads to the bottom line, doesn't it? The question every investor is asking: what's the business model? Where's the payoff here? Their business philosophy is, let's just say it's direct. Hogere prijzen is betere klanten, or higher prices equals better clients. The strategy here is pretty clear. They're positioning themselves as a premium service. They believe that by charging more, they'll attract partners who trust their process and are focused on the final results, not clients who are going to micromanage every little creative decision. And here's what that looks like in practice. The pricing is laid out very transparently in these value-based tiers. It starts with basic production and goes all the way up to full strategic management. Each level is designed to offer a clear value proposition, which is essentially to unburden their clients so they can focus on what they do best. Okay, and this is where the pitch takes a pretty wild and fascinating turn. GAIEC says they are operating with a massive sense of urgency, and it's based on something called the doomsday equation. Now, this model predicts a sort of terminal inflection point on Friday, November 13th, 2026. But they're really clear. They don't think it's the end of the world. They see it as a symbolic moment, a point where our old ways of communicating just won't work anymore, forcing us to adopt a whole new way of thinking. And that leads to their final powerful call to action. Their mission is to establish their methodology, which they call the #GIEC_codex, as the new standard, the new source for creative work before that inflection point hits. So the final question isn't just asking for money. It's framed as an invitation to help build a piece of the future. It's a very ambitious, very provocative way to end a pitch.